I have the idea, like eventually when I finish my professional career, like in mental health. A little early for that.
You can do mid-career memoirs. It's okay.
I'm not even at mid-career, I don't think. A doctorate student right now.
Okay. I'm in denial that I'm no longer living my career.
Yeah. Everybody works. Yeah.
Want us all in here?
Yeah.
Come on. Sure.
Do we have to say? If you say that you can close, they're going to close. They'll just say that you can. If you have like
Yeah. So when I've applied for a couple of grants now and then, they have a lot of issues in action. I just don't do it. It's not really sure. It's more like I'm just doing what everybody else is doing. Like this is me working on a mural homeless shelter. So that's the most I've ever get back in my head.
I think we're about ready to get started. One of our panelists is teaching, so she'll be here a little bit later, Dr. Rich, who's a professor in English department. On behalf of the Department of Psychology, the Department of Art and Design, and the EKU Seid grant, welcome to all of you to our panel discussion this afternoon on healing through art. How many of you are students? How many of you are artists? Artists and students. There you go. I'm Bob Brubaker. I'm the chair of the psychology department. And one of the reasons for our event today is to celebrate our new art therapy concentration as part of the psychology major. I'll talk about that with you in a minute. The plan for today is, I have a few words to say about the concentration, and then I will turn it over to our distinguished panelists. They'll each spend 10 minutes or so talking about their philosophy and theory of art and creative expression, and then they've brought some of their work to share with us, so we'll look at that as well. At least I think of art, as we're talking about today, as very broadly defined. Certainly visual art and conceptual art, literature, really any creative form of expression, any kind of artistic endeavor. The new art therapy concentration, and new as in brand new, it finally made it through the endless university curriculum approval process just a few weeks ago. It's embedded in the psychology major. It's collaborative effort between College of Art, School of Art and Design, the Department of Art and Design, and the Psychology Department. And it's really designed to prepare students for entry into a Master's in Art Therapy program. So the American Association of Art Therapists, I don't have that name right, but the national organization related to art therapy professionals, has specified, recommended, suggested some standards for admission standards for master's programs in art therapy. So our curriculum, the concentration curriculum, is designed to prepare students by providing them with the undergraduate courses they need to apply to those master's programs. It includes 18 hours of coursework in psychology and 18 hours of work in studio art. And the art therapy, art and design department sort of restructured their studio art minor to meet our needs. So it includes all the classes that potential art therapists would need. And it was really in response to student demand. You know, art therapy has been around for a long time as a discipline. And I think for a while, we have an actual art therapist here, so she can correct me if I've got this wrong. But I think for a while, fallen out of favor is not really right, but it wasn't as widely practiced as I think it could be. But I think what has happened more recently over the last 5 or 10 years is that there's more research. You know, in mental health field, it's all about evidence-based therapy. You know, being able to demonstrate that the interventions we're using are effective. So what we've seen in the last few years, last decade maybe, in the art therapy discipline, is more research documenting the effectiveness of those interventions. And as a result, it's attracting more attention from students. It's more likely to be covered by the all-important insurance providers. So the chair of the art department and I were getting increasing number of requests from students for preparation for art therapy. A lot of interest in that going on to that graduate field. I will say though, even if you're not interested in becoming an art therapist, if you're not interested in pursuing that graduate degree, I still think there's a lot of benefit from the curriculum that we're providing. Lots of us, lots of mental health professionals use art and other expressive activities in the context of providing other kinds of mental health services. So I'm a child psychologist, clinical child psychologist. And so I'm certainly not trained as an art therapist, but in my work with kids, it was usually young kids, I often incorporated art activities because you can't sit and have an intellectual conversation with a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old even, or anybody who's maybe reluctant to talk or not quite ready to talk or not quite able to articulate what they want to say. So by employing art as a kind of expressive modality, it gave them a way to communicate with me. And plus it was really fun, and you get things to hang up on the wall at the end of it. So again, if you happen to be a social work major or a clinical psychology person or mental health counseling or education, I think there's a lot to be learned from the art therapy concentration. I am not, as I said, I'm not an art therapist. I'm not really an artist. But in addition to using art as a therapeutic modality, I've also become interested in art personally. I've always had an interest in creative. I was a music major in college and studied art history for decades. And 4 or 5 years ago, I became interested in something called urban sketching. It's this long story, but it's this worldwide group of people who kind of document their travels and places where they live in sketchbooks. It's usually ink and watercolor, or graphite and watercolors. So I got interested in that and started taking art workshops and sketching classes. And you know, I'm something of an anxious, overwrought worrier myself. I have a hard time turning off work when I go home. You know, it's constant. It's hard to relax. So since I've taken up, gotten really involved, obsessively involved really in sketching and watercolors, it has become a real therapeutic process for me. It's sort of a cliche, but I really get in this zone when I'm sketching. I'm able to turn off everything else. Time just kind of flies by. I'll tell you one quick story about that. I was traveling in Amsterdam a few years ago, and if you've been to Amsterdam, you know it's all very narrow and packed in. So I'm sitting on a bench on a canal, sketching what's across the canal, and there's about maybe 1.5 feet in front of me to the edge of the canal, and about 2 feet behind me, and then a road, a city street, and another street coming in behind it. So I'm there sketching away probably an hour and a half at that point. And all of a sudden I realized, sort of got this sense, commotion behind me. And I turned around, and there, I swear to you, no farther than this, was one of those giant tour buses. You know, the 1.5-story high buses. And it had been for some time trying to kind of get around that corner back and forth, right behind me. And I was never even aware of it. So it really does provide for me a nice way of getting away from my usual way of thinking and turning off our troubles. So that's my story. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves to you and ask that they talk a little bit about their own theory or philosophy of therapeutic nature of art. And as I said, they've brought some of their works to share. Some are over here, and Melissa will be projecting some later. So we'll do that for a little while, and then we'll save some time at the end for questions from you. Okay? If you'd like to start, introduce yourself and talk.
I'm not ready to move.
All right, she doesn't want to go first. Pat Banks, who's down there on the end. Sorry, Pat.
Do you want us to stand, or how do you want us to?
It's up to you, whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, I'm Pat Banks. I'm a watercolor artist. I'm the Kentucky River Keeper. I'm a wife, a mother, grandmother, sister, aunt. I have a lot of hats. I don't separate them very well. I don't compartmentalize. Everything is connected to me. My art's connected to everything. And so when I became very interested in environmental work, it was a natural thing to bring my art to it. And people say, well, if you're going to do that, how's that going to interfere with your art? And it's like, interfere with my art? How's that going to work? Because I think through art, we connect to our world. We connect our senses. When you're walking through grass and feeling it, or you walk up to a tree and actually take a minute and hold it, you can feel stuff. It talks to you. And we're separating ourselves as a society more and more away from any sensuous contact with our natural world, which is really disturbing to me. And you know, how many of you have even thought about where your water comes from? And I bet you would all say you are all for clean water. But do you know where your water comes from? Do you know what a watershed is? And do you know that everything that lands on the ground is going to affect your water? And so we just throw stuff away. We go on and on. But I think through art, you can reconnect to the world. Through music, you can just take a few minutes to nurture your soul. Because I think we have to do that. We have to take that time to reconnect. And then the next step is to be inspired by these experiences. And when I'm paddling down a creek or the river, well, of course I'm thinking about, I can't wait to get in my studio so I can try to capture that moment a little bit. Or, you know, I brought some flowers and polar bears over here. I just, that moment you're talking about, I can spend 5 or 6 hours and it's gone. And then I realize, oh my gosh, I've got to get up and walk, or I'm going to, you know, I'm going to seize up, because I really do get really involved in the process. And I think part of that involvement can also be a really healing thing, because it's something you can have control over. There's a lot of things in your life that you can't control. And a lot of things in our society don't make it easy to control. And I'm recently bereaved from a suicide. We lost our son. And he was one of the best people. But he had had 14 seizures in 2 years. He had gone through a divorce that he didn't want. He had lost his job because the Army Corps didn't fund the grant that he was working on. So he had a lot of losses that he was trying to deal with. And then the health thing that kicked in with these seizures, we didn't realize that seizures themselves can cause depression and that the medication can cause depression. His doctor was in Louisville. You know, he was here trying to make it. And the pressure that our society puts on is, okay, he could have worked in a part-time job, but he would have lost his health care and health care for his son, who was also having seizures. His education, he was almost through his master's degree. And he had huge student debt, even with scholarships. So you have real life that can cause pressures for anyone, and it's hard. And then when you start throwing in health issues and other things that are out of your control, even when most of the time we thought he was just coping really well, we're really proud of him. And then sometimes it can be overwhelming. And I'm sharing that with you because my husband was a psychologist in undergrad. I'm an artist. We engaged all of our skills that we could, and we thought we were making progress. And it's still hard. So I think anything we can do to nurture ourselves, to be physically and mentally as at peace as we can. And I think art is a real wonderful tool to use. And I really think what you're doing is important. So if you have any questions about what I could share with you as far as art or the experiences, I'd be glad to answer that. I do have a couple little handouts of, Pat Banks' artist statement and, a description of my art. And I think it's connected to the universe. And so that's that. And I also have some business cards here. So anything else?
Can I plug something for you?
Pardon?
Pat's also one of the forces behind the gallery on Main in downtown Richmond. So the reason the Community Trust Bank has a venue is because of her endeavors locally here. Some of our students have exhibited there before, so just to plug it.
Maybe we'll hold your questions until everybody's introduced themselves and talked a little bit.
My name is Savannah Campbell. I'm a third-year doctoral student in EKU's clinical psychology program, and my art is my writing. For as long as I can remember, I've been a writer. I basically learned how to read and write at the same time, and it's been that way since. And my writing, a friend of mine has told me, and I've become more comfortable with this over time, but my writing is my voice. It's how I express myself, either of what I'm seeing in the world, how I see the world, what I want to change in the world. It's just me. I've even made the joke before, I'm better in print than I am in person. But my writing is how I reflect. I encourage it in others. I'm big on when I work with my therapy clients, if they're comfortable with it or they're wanting to do it, we journal, we document in writing, or I've also used more visual art with them if they prefer that. But when you think Savannah Campbell, people will tell you, oh, the writer. I brought my 3 books with me today. I'm self-published of 3 novels, and they have their roots in psychology as well. The first one, Dreamer, is it's based about lucid dreaming. The main character can control her dreams, not only her own images, but she could go into your dream if you'd like her to. She could hang out with you, see what's going on there. My second book is a dystopia, and it's more about us losing our human connection in the emotional sense. But my third one, it's my most powerful, I feel, to date. My friend who's my editor she agrees. Like, she's like, you've really come into your own with this one. It's called Finding Her Way. And it's about women who they're trying to figure out who they want to be. Like, do they want to be that traditional female role, or do they want to find a way to be something else? And it takes place in the 1960s when those questions and those concerns were really starting to fester and grow stronger. And I'm actually going to be reading to you from this book today. I'm going to be reading you my prologue. And I feel that explains not only everything that I am in my writing, but also a lot of how I see psychology and just the world we have to go through. May 1973. No person should be forced into a mold that's not of their own choosing. Even then, the choice should not be one based in coercion or distress. She looks over her typed words. She knows her views seem controversial, but they're the training on which she's based her professional life. She's learned to value a person for being him or herself. This is something she's had tested a few times, all heard in different ways. Some even occurred before she made it her job to care. She starts to look over the page in front of her again. She tries to decide on her next paragraph's opening sentence when the next song comes on her radio. Helen Reddy sings about a woman whose beauty that hides her inner sadness. She nods and decides to start the next section with details about one of her most successful therapy cases. I have copies of these books with me here today if you'd like to purchase a copy, but they're also available on Amazon, either in paperback or Kindle formats. Thank you.
My name is Ora Embree. Ora is an Igbo name. That means goodwill to family and friends, or the good wishes of the people. I was born to great parents within a tight-knit extended family, learning how to make do, think outside the box, the importance of family, past and present, and nature. Elementary, I enjoyed drawing and sketching so much that I wanted to become an art teacher. I wrote my first poem in the second grade to my first camera as a present while I was in middle school. My twin brother and I were toddlers, if not earlier. We started helping with the family garden and the orchard. However, as I grew older, I stopped taking time to be creative. Over time, I lost a part of who I was. I'm somewhat resurrected my creativity as my daughter was born, as I started teaching her how to write and to draw, but it was short-lived. I continued to neglect myself until I passed my breaking point. I moved to Clements, Ohio in 2012 with the intention of getting back to what I lost. In doing so, I resurrected my creative side and consciously made time to cook, take photographs, draw and sketch. I knew I needed to start the long-term process of healing myself. For me, being creative in the kitchen, in nature, in the garden, and elsewhere is spiritual, self-affirming, transformative, and aids keeping me having a balance between the virtual world in which I work as a web developer and the real world. I enjoy taking photographs as it reminds me of the inherent natural beauty of nature. Most of the photography that I take is done by communing with her, either by myself or with others. I think that the solitude, the calmness, the serenity, and patience I need to have to take photographs helps me to live in the moment and cherish the positive things in my life. I brought some of my photographs from me they're over here. I forward them. Well, the first one with the birds called Contemplation. And the part there is so, I guess, reaffirming in the sense that oftentimes we don't take the time to kind of, quote unquote, smell the coffee. And that we sometimes get so caught up in everything else that goes on in our lives that we feel to take time to contemplate our own lives to figure out what's going on with us. As Pat mentioned about her son, and sometimes that when people are depressed or Seid, we keep on, I guess, having all these external forces that go against us, and they kind of bog us down, and we kind of forget about the good in our lives. And so in doing so, we just keep on reinforcing that negative images of ourselves, and eventually it can reach a point that we do decide to take our own lives. And the one that Judy just showed was called Growing in the Water. I think that's a very important thing, not just for myself, but other people who kind of look at it, because oftentimes we kind of think that trees, vegetation cannot grow in the water. If they do, they have to be close to the shore. That tree right there is about to get 20 feet from the shore. I took a picture 2 years ago here in Madison County, and that tree had roots extending from the tree right there to the shore. Belongs to on both sides, to the east and the west. Another picture on the couch is called Nature Shall Rise Again. I kind of liken that to basically the mythical phoenix that rose from the ashes. I think that sometimes too, we as humans need to rise from our own ashes, to rise again, rise above what people kind of say we can and can't do. And the last one there is called,
Is this one?
yes, One Day at a Time. I took that at England Falls 2 years ago, and it's not good to remember to take things one day at a time. We can't always be impatient about everything that happens in our lives and understand everything happens for a reason. And as far as just being creative goes, I think that creativity comes in many different forms. And when I started doing as an adult in 2002, was to grow food. A lot of times that's kind of not looked at as being a creative pursuit, because the way I pursue gardening and how I try to have a lot of different colors in there, different plants that have different benefits. You plant flowers right to pollinators, which basically in turn pollinate your cucumber family, the cucumbers, watermelon, as opposed to corn. Most of 75% of the plants that the food we consume has to be pollinated. And so by not having pollinators around or something, of course, you cannot have anything to pollinate your plants. And then also too, I try to add nutrient accumulators that basically will add nutrients to the soil, and therefore it gets to the food that we consume. A lot of food we consume today has no nutrients in it because the soil is depleted of nutrients. And some of the photographs I took while living in Columbus kind of show a little bit of my gardens. These are here I call twins, represent basically my brother and myself. This right here is a picture of our garden that I had about, I guess, 10 years ago or so, kind of showing the diversity inside the garden. There's corn there, watermelon, beans, onions, flax was in here too. It's kind of showed that you can grow more than one thing at a time in the garden. Even it starts right here. It's an 8x10 raised bed. I call it So Happy Together. This here kind of shows something kind of similar to as well. And here are nasturtiums, basil, I believe beans too as well, flax, other plants. And also part of healing too is culinary arts. People might get about there. And that kind for me includes not just cooking food, but also to making food from scratch that was raw. And I made a salad myself during my healing process while I was living in Columbus. I shared with a friend, and this kind of shows you the extent of what a salad can do for you, not just from the colors though, but from the love that you put into the salad or what food you're making for yourself. Along with my photography, I've done a lot of writing over the years, as I mentioned before, and I kind of stopped doing a lot of things for different reasons over the years, but when I did move to Columbus, I made sure that I wanted to get back what I lost. So I started trying to be more creative and do more writing, and I wrote a poem, I actually wrote a lot of poems. I moved back to Columbus in 2013. As I ever kind of healed myself, I was going through a very rough spot or time period, and I wrote about 40 poems or more within a 2-week span. One night I wrote probably like 10 poems. I was up to about 5 in the morning, so I was writing, trying to get off my chest, and just trying to help myself to heal. And one poem that I wrote called Healing Myself. This was written 2014 in March. And looking inwardly, I see that I've been broken. I played Russian roulette with love and have lost. I have very few regrets from the failed relationships of the past. I was not be who I am today without them. I recognize that on every parade, a little rain must fall. I sat too close to the fire and continued to get burned. But until now, I can never figure out why. Had I come to terms with my own imbalance and resurrect my spiritual journey. I'm in the process of remembering the things I lost in the fire. I'm starting to see the forest and can see the light. My healing is timely and can come at a better time. I was falling deep into the abyss, lost life I thought I had. But in the process, found one that neglected, and that was me. I'm working that I have torn down. I was my worst enemy, and I have become my own savior. I cannot wait for someone else to come and fix me, let alone see that I've been broken. After the collateral damage, let myself wound down the battlefield. I was losing blood, my vital signs were low. Hell, I even contemplated suicide, but the vision came from me, but I couldn't find a lifeline. I knew then that I had to resurrect my lifeless body. Sometime later, I'm still in the healing mindset, and getting stronger and wiser with each day. I'm working picking up the broken pieces and mending what I can. I know that I have the capacity within to heal myself. It will be a long struggle, but I'm patient and will persevere till the healing is complete. And at that point right there, I did this sketch, I guess a couple weeks later or so, kind of illustrating some of my thoughts in my mind. And there's a lot of different symbols down here. The initials represent basically some of my lost loves. And then the words kind of represent some of the, I guess, thoughts that I had that came from the poem that I've written. And the images themselves are just sketches of things that came to my mind while I was drawing that day, or sketching rather, I should say. Sometimes when I sketch or draw, I just have a thought in mind when I'm going to sketch or draw. It happens to start appearing on the page, and then I do another one. Then my writing too, I usually write, and my thoughts just start flowing out. And I never know what I'm gonna say all the time, ahead of time. It just happens to come out. It's my thing that you said, it's said. And for me personally, my writing, I try to be very open and honest about things from my past, think about myself, my shortcomings, my positive attributes. So that way I can be honest with myself and contemplate basically my own situation. So that way I can figure out how to get out of it. I realized that sometimes in the past I blamed others for my own issues or problems stuff, but I realized though that I was party to what happened, and so I blame myself and look at, basically at the man in the mirror to see what I can fix, make myself better, heal myself. And that to me is kind of part of the process of art and therapy.
Thank you. Julie?
My name is Julie Struck. You know, the older I get, the harder it is to summarize myself in just a few minutes. I was a college art professor for almost 20 years before I realized that it was not as fulfilling as I thought it could be. And so I did something kind of outrageous after teaching for 20 years. I decided that I wanted to take some time off and figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I didn't get a whole lot of support for doing that, but I did it anyway. And I ended up doing some volunteerism. And the volunteerism led to an AmeriCorps position. I don't know how many of you have heard of AmeriCorps in here. Anybody? Okay. And then from the AmeriCorps position, I really decided to change my life, and I left marriage, left a area that I lived in for a long time, moved to Berea and became a VISTA leader. VISTA is also an AmeriCorps program. And from there, I actually now have a new career. I'm an AmeriCorps program director here at EKU in the College of Justice and Safety. So that's kind of my professional trajectory. When it comes to art, I think this is a really complicated story. I grew up in a household with a mom who was an artist. I really wanted to be just like her. That's just my big dream. But I also grew up in a very abusive situation. And there were many years when I was a young person, a teenager, where I couldn't draw at all, even though I had a lot of talent. I ended up not going to college to pursue art studies until I was in my 20s. I had children already, and halfway through that, my long college career as a student, I ended up being a single mom and raising teenagers while I was in school. I have to say that initially, my art career was pretty traditional. You know, I learned how to oil paint, I learned how to draw. I took all the classes that art students do, and a lot of it's technique, a lot of it is drawing from still life and stuff like that. And it was only when I started painting that I realized that I could actually tell family secrets and family stories through my artwork. You wouldn't know it to look at my very early work. It's pretty abstract and it's structural, but those early paintings were about how I felt about my father. And then I did a series that were about my mother. And in the interim, while I'm doing this, I'm actually getting into shows already because I'm sending my artwork out. Nobody really knew what was up on that wall and what it really meant. And then finally, when I was in graduate school, I decided that I really needed to tell my story a little more directly. And this was really, it taught me courage. You know, it's not easy to tell stories like that, especially when your whole family wants you to shut up. When I had my MFA show, the whole show was about my family, and there are family members to this day who will not talk to me because of the content of that show. But a long time ago, I decided that I'm going to be the family whistleblower, and I'm going to use my work to tell stories. That's what I do. The artwork that I brought here, before I go on and show the artwork, part of the volunteerism that I did was I went into a homeless shelter in Evansville, Indiana, and started an art program. And I really wanted it to work, and I really wanted it to become a kind of economic empowerment project for the people that I worked with at the shelter. We did a mural. That's when I think I really learned about not just the power that art gave me, but the power that art can give other people. And I know art's expressive. A lot of times when people learn that you do an art program with homeless people, they're just like, oh yeah, they can express themselves, get all those negative feelings out. Yeah, sure, right, that's part of it. Another part of it is the control issue that I think you mentioned, correct? When you make art, you are the creator. It's a concrete piece of something that you have there that's yours. And I can't tell you how important that is to homeless people. I even had homeless folks who made artworks ask if they could take them with them. And I was like, it's your artwork. You need to take it with you. Of course you take it with you. It was amazing and so empowering for both me and for them when I was running that program. It was just amazing. So since then, I do a lot more art projects with people. Okay, I don't do as much of my own artwork as much as I facilitate art projects for others. So a couple things that I've been working on is I've helped create the Artvention event that we have here at EKU. And that's really meaningful to me because I lost a loved one to suicide as well. And that rocked my world, and it still does. And now I'm involved in a mural project, or like a mural initiative in Berea. And what I want to do with that mural initiative is do community-based projects, so the community actually produces the murals. And I do a lot more facilitating, and I want the murals to be meaningful, so awareness-raising kinds of things. So we have a grant in the works to do a mural that has to do with mental health awareness for youth, because there's so many issues happening in high schools right now. So that's the kind of art I do. Now the art that I actually brought, and I have to stand up to show this because my pieces are not framed. I created these to help myself during my transition from an art professor to a volunteer, and then basically kind of changing my life. Sorry, I'm just so much at the table. And these are part of a series, and I'm just going to show you a few of them. I already mentioned that I do artwork about my family, and actually this is artwork about my family. You know, when you're in a family that doesn't want you to tell family secrets, it's really empowering to like use images kind of like this. The images actually, I was inspired by a number of things, and that's why some of these images are in here, but a lot of these images relate to things that happened to me when I was a child. I was also grieving and really suffering because I studied a long time to be a teacher, and it just wasn't working out, right? So I used these artworks to kind of grieve about that too. One of the things that I did is, you know, when you're an art professor, you're supposed to exhibit your work all the time on top of all the teaching that you do. And it got to the point that my summers were spent like making art like it was a chore. So when I finally left higher education and was working on these drawings, I'm like, I got to get the meaning back. So I love to draw with graphite, just love it. And I really had not done that for a long time. So doing these studies of these goddesses and all that drapery, it became kind of meditative for me and was really helpful in getting through the whole process. Part of my family history also involves something that happened between myself and one of my brothers who's now dead. He died of a heart condition, real rare. He's my older brother. I was second oldest, and so it still feels weird to me that I'm older than my brother now. It seems impossible. But I used to go visit this wonderful seminary now and then, and they were a Benedictine order. And I don't know if you know anything about, I have a Catholic background, so I got all this stuff in my head all the time. It was a Benedictine order, and so Saint Benedict, that came from Saint Benedict, and Saint Benedict had a sister who was a nun named Saint Scholastica. And so there seemed to me to be a really, really strong connection here, the brother and sister idea, you know, for me, family history, and then also Scholastica, you know, school. I was busy grieving, you know, losing that teaching career that I had. And so, yeah, I took some photographs, and again, you know, doing the graphite was just so, I don't know, just really, really empowering for me. The other thing that I really like to put in my artworks is words. I used to teach a lot of graphic design and design classes, and I love typography. So you'll see a lot of that in my artwork too. So these artworks are a little bit dated, but I thought they were important to bring in and show and talk to because they really, really did a lot for me when I was making them. And that's it.
Next is Dr. Rich.
Yes, hi everybody. I was teaching class, so I got here late.
Here's the seat up here.
Well, and I've got a PowerPoint. So can I get that?
You can actually, I've got it set up on mine. I can probably queue it up on mine. Here, I've got a remote for the PowerPoint.
Okay, well, I just brought it on a flash drive, so I was going to use it. Oh, well,
That's what it's connected to.
okay, but it's not me.
I can put it up.
Okay. Some remote thing. Okay, sorry. You must have find it so I can find it. Okay, so it's going to be in professional development. And then it's going to be something.
While they are getting that, if there's anybody that
It
has
might be
not
an
signed
invited
in,
lecture
you
on
just
some
raise your
Perkins.
hand.
Oh, there it is. No, it's authors writing this therapy.
Pass this on.
Well, and also while they're doing that. also,
There it is.
like,
Woohoo. All
this
right.
is
Do you want me to be your
information
arrow
about
girl?
the art
You want
therapy.
me to be your arrow girl?
art therapy.
Yeah. I'll just like look at you.
Kick me or
Perfect.
tap me in.
Okay.
Sweet. Hey everybody, so this is really different because I'm not a creator myself, except of boring scholarly articles and books that nobody really reads. So I'm an American literature scholar, but I was asked to be part of this because, well, you know, we're talking about creative people, be they visual artists or writers or other types of art, music, dance, using the creative act as a way to process their world and to arguably heal themselves, right? Or to process difficult emotions or experiences and to make something out of that. So I, being an Americanist, I just thought, well, I'll pick 3 American writers that I think of as really having drawn upon challenge in their own lives to create beautiful art or very productive artistic careers. So yeah, let's hit it. Okay, so the first case is Emily Dickinson. I'm gonna move chronologically here. Now she's the one who's a little bit, well, not just a little bit, probably the most difficult to really talk about in light of this theme because we don't know a lot about her life, okay? And if you look into the scholarship and into the discussion of Emily Dickinson, you'll see that there is some difference of opinion of the issues of her life that led to her living the way she did and writing the way she did and so forth. But from what I had a brief time to be able to research and prepare for you, this is what I can share. So again, she lived in the 19th century there from 1830 to 1886, all in Massachusetts. And when I looked at the Emily Dickinson Museum website, of course it is based in Massachusetts there, her actual home, I wanted to see what the curators of that place had to say about this sort of conversation there is about her. And they soft-pedaled it, definitely. They said that her increasing withdrawal from normal social situations began in her mid-20s. Among Dickinson scholars, disagreement exists concerning whether hers was a deliberate choice as an artist to isolate herself so that she could focus on her work, or whether such unusual behaviors as, for example, speaking with select visitors from behind a darkened door rather than face-to-face had medical origin, such as an anxiety condition. So basically that is the conversation about Emily Dickinson. And if you want to go to the next page. But what we do know about her, so that remains a matter of conversation. What we do know about her writing is that she had an incredibly prolific period of about 8 years where she wrote over 1,000 poems. And remember, very, very little of this was ever published in her own life. I believe 8 to 9 poems were published in her own life, and the remainder were discovered after her death. Carefully sorted into these bound, sewed together packets called fascicles. It's really, really fascinating stuff about her. But what we can discern, and I'm basing here on a psychological article that appeared in the Scholarly Psychology Journal by John McDermott, identifies seasonal patterns to her output. So she wrote quite a bit more in the spring and summer months and less in the fall and winter over this 8-year period as a whole. And that some type of emotional crisis appears to have occurred in her life at about 4 years into this period. She refers to it in a letter to a mentor of hers, Thomas Wentworth Higginson, as the terror, and she doesn't ever say what it was. But we do know that there was this emotional crisis, it seems, that occurs between the first 4 and last 4 years of this period, and that after this crisis, her output was even more heightened. Her number of poems she was writing, you know, per week, per month, and again, the dating of them has been as carefully done as can be possible without absolute knowledge, but a fairly clear sense of when poems were written. But after this crisis, her output was even more heightened and her style underwent even more evolution to become even more unique. And that is an important thing to keep in mind for Emily Dickinson's poetry, is that it does not look like most other 19th century poetry. It's quite different. All those dashes, all those strange slant rhymes, all those odd, seemingly random capitalizations of words, all this is very different from typical poetry. So that's kind of the idea there. Again, we don't know for sure, but it has been posited, the idea that she may have suffered from a seasonal affective disorder, that she may have suffered from a sort of manic depressive disorder where she had periods of high output followed by periods of depression. And if you can go to the next slide, thank you. I just thought I'd share with you one of her more famous poems. This is number 320, and again, we don't have anything more than the numbering system for them. But I think this is one that gets at her a take toward the seasons of the year that you'll see, there's several poems about summer that are very celebratory and just joyous. And this is a one about winter that I think, arguably gives us a sense of the idea of a seasonal affective disorder. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it, any, 'tis the sealed despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. And then moving on. Second writer I wanted to share with you is Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Has anybody read the short story The Yellow Wallpaper? Is that ringing any bells with anyone? 1, 2, 3, okay, a few of you, all right. So she's more of a turn of the century and early 20th century figure. She lived from 1860 to 1935, and she married fairly young, as was expected of young women in her day, despite her interest in pursuing an artistic career. The only formal schooling she had was a year at the brand newly opened Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, and she did a year of artistic training there and was sort of got some kind of brief license to be able to do. She did some artwork for advertisements and so forth, but she was also very interested in writing. But she got married quite young, as again was expected of women of her day, and had a child less than a year after she was born, about 10 and a half months, or after she was married, excuse me, about 10 and a half months after her marriage. And she suffered what is clearly identifiable now as a case of postpartum depression after the birth of this daughter of hers, Catherine. So in 1886, at the behest of her husband and a family who were very concerned about her, she went to Philadelphia for what was called the rest cure treatment. You're smiling. Have you ever heard of this before?
I might need it.
Okay. So there was a very prominent physician in the 19th century. He'd made quite a name for himself in treating Civil War combat survivors. And he, I believe it was he who first identified what we call now phantom limb syndrome. I think you can go look him up. He was very prolific and kind of a celebrity doctor in his time. He was kind of a Dr. Oz of his day. But he had popularized, at least I don't know if he fully invented it himself, but he certainly kind of finessed it and publicized it, the rest cure treatment for these very 19th century terms we have for these things, neurasthenia, which is largely now considered maybe a mix of anxiety and depression, and hysteria. Well, like, let's guess who suffered from that? Women. Yeah, right, due to the prefix of the word there. And again, largely conditions of anxiety, depression, things of that kind. Okay. So if you could go on to the next one. She was checked in to a sanitarium in Philadelphia. He recommended a month's stay. And what did the rest cure or treatment consist of? Well, you had to lie in bed. You were spoon-fed by nurses. They changed your sheets. They changed your clothes. You got massage to kind of keep you, supple. Even I think some electrical stimulation for the muscles to keep the muscles from atrophying too much, but they did not really want you moving around. And most importantly, you were not supposed to have friends and relatives coming and visiting you. Nurses could come in and out. The doctor came to see you every day. And, theorists now, historians and so forth, who look at this rest cure treatment realize it was a sort of, he believed that with enough mind control, you could kind of fix whatever was wrong. And especially for women, many were coming complaining of their, unhappiness with their lives. Many of them were wives and mothers and in the domestic sphere. And it was the idea that you sort of surfeit these patients with so much rest and inactivity that they are then happy to get up and go back about their domestic lives as wives and mothers again. Yeah, okay. So you can imagine for a creative type and an ambitious young woman like Charlotte Perkins Gilman, this was challenging. So Mitchell sends her home with instructions to limit her creative endeavors and to, quote, as she said later in a piece she wrote about the Yellow Wallpaper, to live as domestic a life as possible as a wife. However, she tried it, and she says, I got so near the edge of ruin, I was looking over, but I pulled back. I knew this wasn't good for me. She instead decided to move to California. She ended her first marriage, which was an unhappy marriage, and she pursued writing and activism, completing The Yellow Wallpaper, her famous story, which was published in 1892. Can you go on to the next? Thank you. And again, if you haven't read this story, I highly recommend you're looking it up. I teach it in every class practically that I get a chance where it's relevant to do. And it's an amazing story. It's a fictionalization. Students often have this takeaway about Gilman. Oh yeah, she's the crazy lady that wrote the yellow wallpaper, where this woman goes crazy. She's stuck in a room just looking at the yellow wallpaper and she goes crazy, right? Oh yeah, I know that story, right? And I always say, no, there's so much more to Gilman than that, first of all. And secondly, it's a fictionalization, okay? She did not go crazy, but she's using what happened to her as an imaginative spur to write a very cool and kind of creepy and eerie and really kind of fun, in a make the hair stand up on the back of your neck kind of way story. And so what I'm showing you here are a couple of the pen and ink illustrations from its first magazine publication in New England Magazine in 1892. And it's kind of the beginning to the end of the story. In the beginning, there is the proper young housewife there who has a baby who makes her nervous, she says, this narrator, but who has been told by her husband, who is a doctor, to stay in this one room all summer. Okay, they've rented a house and she's sort of being subjected to basically a rest cure. And she's writing in a journal. She's not supposed to be writing, okay? That was another one of Mitchell's prescriptions to Gilman, was no, don't touch pen or paper or brush. But by the end of the story, staring at that awful yellow patterned wallpaper has basically driven her crazy. She's been isolated there, she's been imprisoned there, and she's kind of just, you know, she's in her full throes of, she's crawling over her husband at that point, okay? And here's a quote from the story where the young woman says this near the beginning of the story when she refers to the prescription that her husband, the doctor, and her brother, another doctor, have agreed upon for her. You know, no, just rest, no creative work, no company. She says, personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? So it's a pretty amazing story, and I definitely recommend you look it up. And just to sort of give the correct picture of Gilman's life, since so many people seem to have this misconception about her, she went on to a very prolific career as a social reformer, public lecturer, and author. She published 675 fictional works, nearly 500 poems, and over 2,000 works of nonfiction, largely social criticism, including a landmark work in 1898 called Women in Economics, an early feminist classic where she was analyzing the economic dependence of women within marriage and making an argument for why women should be able to work outside the home, should be able to retain their own money, that kind of thing. And an 1894 diary entry of hers, I think, really sums up this take of life that she had. She said, "Help me to work, to really do the things I have in mind, to write, write, write. Give me more and more of the great stream of life. Let me feel it and give it out in all the ways I know. This means health and power and all good." So there's Gilman, not just the crazy lady that wrote the yellow wallpaper. All right, so now you all have a takeaway about her. And finally, Robert Lowell. He is a mid-20th century poet in America, born in 1917 and died in 1977. He came from a fairly privileged New England family, and he enjoyed early success as a poet. However, he suffered several manic depressive episodes for which he was repeatedly hospitalized, I think to the tune of 12 times between about the late 40s and early 60s. And he was urged by his psychiatrists to write about his childhood. And here's a scholar, I'm quoting Thurston, in saying that these writings finally led to 91 Revere Street, the prose memoir at the heart of his 1959 book, Life Studies, as well as the autobiographical poems of that book's section. It's a 4-section book, and the final section is called Life Studies and includes these incredibly beautiful, very personal poems that make him basically the person who kicked off the confessional poetry movement. If you can move on to the next slide there. So that's his legacy. That's who we know Robert Lowell for today, the confessional poetry movement. It dealt with, as again, I'm quoting another source here, a subject matter that previously not been openly discussed in American poetry. This was 1950s America. This was a fairly repressive environment, right, where you didn't talk about personal, messy, difficult experiences you had been through, right? Private experiences with feelings about death, trauma, depression, and relationships were addressed, and often, again, in a very openly autobiographical manner. Us looking at each other in 2019, we go, yeah, so what? We do that all the time, but not so much in 1950, right? So we have to remember that, what a great contribution that was of his. And if you'll go to the next slide, I just thought I'd share with you, this is a section from a poem called Home After 3 Months Away from his volume, Life Studies, this very influential volume of poetry. He had been hospitalized and come back home, and it's just a beautiful, intimate moment of taking care of his baby daughter, his young toddler daughter. And I think it's just a beautiful way of blending the the redemptive, the nurturing power of the everyday, right? Just everyday experience in life, alongside an acknowledgement of what it is he has just been through, okay? So just a few lines from the poem here. 3 months, 3 months. Is Richard now himself again? Dimpled with exaltation, my daughter holds her levy in the tub. Our noses rub, each of us pats a stringy lock of hair. They tell me nothing's gone. Though I am 41, not 40 now. The time I put away was child's play. After 13 weeks, my child still dabs her cheeks to start me shaving. When we dress her in her sky blue corduroy, she changes to a boy and floats my shaving brush and washcloth in the flush. Dearest, I cannot loiter here in lather like a polar bear. And then if you want to go to the final slide there, if any of you are interested in more of this, these are my sources, and I'd be happy to share some of these sources with you. But I hope that was a helpful insight into some writers who have dealt with writing as therapy. Thank you. Yes. Oh. It doesn't like that you have a PowerPoint.
Apparently.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What, you don't want to sit up here with us?
Oh, I'll stay back here.
Yes, please.
Hello. My name is Melissa Vandenberg. I want to thank the Department of Psychology for having me here. I'm a professor in the Department of Art and Design, and I've been at EKU for about 10 years. I'm happy to actually have one of my alums in the audience right now, happens to be my studio assistant on occasion, so she can keep me from talking too much BS to you this afternoon. I hope my perspective will be of some interest. It's going to be a little unorthodox. I will show a little bit of my own work. This is actually a piece Casey helped me create. These are large scale letters, each about 3 feet by 3 feet by 2.5 to 3 feet. They're stuffed. They're made of Army surplus shelter tents. So the kind of thing that you'd get at the Army surplus store. They're imbued with that same odor that you get when you go into a Goodwill or an Army surplus store. But these were materials, these were textiles actually used by soldiers. So some of the works I'm going to talk about today are looking at the political landscape and dissidence in art making as a way for social healing or healing on a bigger civil or civic spectrum as a maker. My personal studio practice has a lot to do with current events. And I do not have a specific specialty as far as material, although I do have a slant towards textiles in particular. Again, I'm not an art historian, a writer, a therapist, or anything remotely related to the field of psychology. I'm an artist vested in the education of other artists, and I wish us to multiply because I believe in what we do and that it has deep merit. Healing through art interested me because of the inclusiveness of the title. Art is both a noun and a verb here, an outcome and an action. Now, at risk of reinforcing certain stereotypes, artists can be a defensive bunch. The most serious amongst us are devout to our practice, sometimes with a militancy that can be somewhat off-putting. I would add, however, rightfully so. Many creative citizens, our musicians, dancers, actors, writers, and of course our visual artists, struggle to keep our creativity alive in the face of low wages, lack of health care, and very regular job insecurity. Society likes to tell its artistic class that we are valued, but our bank accounts tend to say otherwise fairly often. Not to deter you from a career in the arts, just FYI, my recruitment self is going to show up here. With this context in mind, though, I've been hesitant to associate my studio practice with anything therapeutic. And as far as artists are concerned, I'm not alone in this habit. It's probably a bad habit, but I'll kind of maybe explain why. Many of those that educated me and some of my immediate contemporaries have actually confessed these same sorts of concerns. One such example comes from the mid-90s when I was in undergraduate school in Detroit. One of my most valued art school professors gave me what I thought to be good advice at the time, and it was that he probably should have provided some sort of caveat. I had made mention to him that one of my sculptures made for his class was cathartic, and that it was helping me navigate a newly diagnosed health issue. I learned of a birth defect and a problem in my back that would limit my future mobility and creative process. And I had to sort of reevaluate how my creative future might unfold. I was coming from a woodworking and a bronze casting situation, and it was something my body was just not going to hold up to over the decades. That didn't stop me, but it probably did hinder my long-term mobility. My mentor cautioned me right away when I talked about catharsis related to my work, explaining that by divulging a cathartic attribute to the work, it could be easily dismissed by some as just therapy. I was kind of shocked by this, but it did make some sense. This could potentially make the process more valuable than the product. It forced a question regarding art made strictly for the individual versus art made for sharing. And those of you in front of you today, we're mostly interested in sharing our work. We want to share it with others. It's easy to ignore that there is some sort of space in between this work for the individual and work for a bigger social construct. The concern for my work being labeled therapeutic stuck with me and made me even to hesitate to accept the panel invitation. Instead, I wanted to reevaluate my own bias and use this as a prompt to examine a potential collective catharsis that is both individual and communal. One of the many prevailing questions in my own work has been, what is the responsibility of the artist? Is it just to ourselves? Is it to society as a whole? Can we be part of larger scale healing, social reflection, and potentially community, neighborhood, or civic recovery? Now, I would be a flagrant liar if I said my art making doesn't also service my mental state of well-being. If I spend too much time away from the studio, I'm not somebody that you'd want to be around. That said, we do tend to excessively romanticize the art making process, complete with all these fantasies of the free-spirited artist wearing paint-encrusted pants in some hypnotic state, achieving a higher plane of enlightenment. I only wish I was that cool. The reality of the process is much more blue-collar, day in, day out, the artist putting in the work, putting in the hours, making a lot of ugly, and then hoping that something of merit is either unearthed or more than likely a deadline just simply arrives. Now, over the years, my work has become increasingly more political, motivated by current events, as I had mentioned. I think my focus has more grown into civically engaged art, social practice, and social justice work. And these are pieces that tend to involve a bigger community. They tend to involve great deals of research, understanding that what you make as a creator does have some site specificity. I'll sort of plug Pat's work with thinking about water reclamation. You know, this has a literal outcome of potentially helping fundraise money for actually reclamation of our local water sources. But also I think it does something a little bit deeper to bring community members together, thinking about their own territory and their own landscape. With my work in particular, by picking materials, and I'm doing so pretty mindfully when I'm picking fabrics, when I'm working with old quilts or old textiles, there's baggage there, there's the scent there. When I'm working with a quilt, there's the feeling of other women's hands in each of those stitches. And I can't help but think about quilting circles and the way other people kind of come together. Just off the top of my head, I started kind of questioning and asking myself, what was the earliest work that affected me that I noticed would have had some sort of sense of social healing? And in school, I learned of Pablo Picasso's Guernica. During the Spanish Civil War, the town of Guernica was bombed, and many people died. This is in the Basque region. And this work, which is a giant mural, it's probably as big as this wall, actually maybe even a little bit bigger, and it's all black and white primarily. This sort of set a tone when I started thinking about my own personal agendas in the studio as a young student in Detroit compared to what I wanted to do and how I wanted to interact with others later on in life. This work is by myself. It's called Sink or Swim Family Style. And I kept thinking about legislation that was meant to help the family, that could hinder the family in the US. I'm a bleeding heart liberal, a radical, a raving progressive, all those sort of naughty things that we have stereotypes with artists. And I was sort of shocked also as a person that came from a very big military background. My last name Vandenberg is as in Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. And there was actually, which I think is hysterical, oh God, what do you call the giant war vessels?
Tanks?
No, like in the ocean.
Aircraft
Aircraft carrier. There's a Vandenberg aircraft carrier that they sank, which I get to actually officially say somebody sank my battleship, which I think is pretty awesome. But so I grew up in this very kind of patriotic household, sort of going back to that first piece where I used the word patriot, but I sort of pulled the subtext out of the word riot. And that's built into patriotism, just semantically speaking, or looking at our linguistic history. So doing sort of a life vest that's dad size, mom size, child size, this conventional family. You created out of used flags, discarded flags. And I got yelled at for doing work like this because I was cutting the American flag. Yet these were flags that I found in the bottom of a dollar bin in a Goodwill full of spider eggs. I took home, hand washed, dried, and still kind of got accosted for the use of them. So I do take that risk very seriously, but I think textiles, because we have such a personal relationship, you know, you're all sitting on it, you're all wearing it. It's something we tend to overlook, but you definitely don't leave the house without them. It wouldn't go unnoticed if you left the house without your textiles. Now, my piece was done in 2012, and I got really, really excited when I saw a famous artist by the name of Ai Weiwei. Is anybody familiar with Weiwei's work here? Awesome. One person? Awesome. He's very much still alive and working. He's an activist. He's an artist. He spent part of the 80s and early 90s in New York. His education has been both in Asia and here in the US. But he's also one of the most feared creative forces by the Chinese government. He has been arrested, he's been detained, he's been prosecuted and jailed, he's been beaten by the Chinese government for his dissident thoughts. They claim that he incites social uprising and violence. Well, this work, which was done on the Concert House in Berlin, is Syrian refugee life jackets that were collected with the help of the people in Lesbos. He collected, I believe, about 14,000 of them. And in this piece, they say there's 14,000, but I know numbers. And I think there's maybe about 4,000 actually on the columns. But in front on the street, there is some other piles of life jackets in the proximity. So that's maybe where they're getting the 14,000 from. That's a close-up. That cautionary orange that we're also familiar with, it's a color, it's a palette that I'm interested in, but it's also very universal. It supersedes common language because every nation you go to tends to gravitate towards this cautionary orange for kind of a warning, societally speaking. Now, when I look at Weiwei's work, I can't help but be really moved by this one-to-one ratio, this formula he's using in his studio practice. And of course, he has lots of help. He's very famous, he has lots of money, lots of assistants, and he's able to work with different government agencies to get them on board to help create this work. So it's not happening all by himself. So having a community involved in the creation of the work, but also looking at exact current events. He did this very shortly. You know, this is still a crisis that's ongoing now. So I wanted to kind of flank with what some contemporary artists are doing with what's been done sort of in recent past. But I think the further we look back, it's easier to analyze, and it's much more comfortable to analyze political work because some time has passed. When we're talking about things that people are still very much separated on, the debate, you know, here in the US, a lot of us carry a great fear of the other, of immigrants and what they could potentially take or supposedly take from us. So it's a hot topic. It can be difficult to talk about. And I love that art can be this point of departure. This is an image of the vests on the Greek island, essentially. As they're being collected, they're quickly discarded by the refugees coming ashore. And then the government's cleaning up because the next day there'll be a whole nother pile of life vests that will have to be procured. I also think it's interesting to take something that's such a difficult topic to discuss, but also make it so beautiful. Am I the only one that finds this absolutely stunning? And to transform a space this way, a social space in a civic center in a town area, I think is pretty interesting. Now, he repeats these sort of installations in different areas. This one was done in Denmark. And this is actually in the windows of a museum. So there's a more sympathetic audience when you're working with art audiences or art architecture versus traditional civic buildings, which I've got some examples of a couple other artists that are sort of looking at how to make art public, how to make it look at difficult issues. And, you know, I don't think Ai Weiwei would come in here and tell you that his work is about healing. I'm opposing that kind of concept on his practice. But I can't help but be moved into forcing myself to kind of consider these difficult topics when I'm looking at his work. This is in Vienna, Austria. I'm sorry, this should say life vests, not backpacks. This work, which was earlier, this dates from 2009, and this is in response to the earthquake in China, the Sichuan earthquake. where there was a lot of criticism of the Chinese government because they were refusing to release death tolls of children in that earthquake. Does anybody here remember that being in the news? I'm sure a couple people do, but not as many as I would hope. The Chinese government didn't want to release the information because it would be revealing that the architecture a lot of the schools had been utilizing was subpar, and these buildings fell. They nicknamed it tofu architecture at the time. So as soon as the earthquake hit, more buildings than what would have been socially appropriate or normal, not that any should be appropriate, but more buildings should have been able to withstand the power of that particular earthquake. And about 5,200 children died, but nobody, the media, could get the information from the government. So Ai Weiwei took it upon himself, being one of the early artists to start using Twitter in a very socially oriented format, and to use Twitter and his websites as an extension of his studio practice. Again, crowdsourcing information, getting people to kind of band together, to rally together under a cause to help them create work. In this case, Ai Weiwei and a team of dozens went out to rural areas of China and talked to the parents of the children that were lost, to find out who actually died. And they found the number of 5,200. So that's at the bottom scope. This installation on the outside of the Hustukunst consists of 9,000 children's backpacks. Now, these are not the backpacks. These were made through manufacturing and they're brand new. But the backpacks spell out in a calligraphic text one of the words of the mothers. For 7 years, she lived happily on this earth. That was the one thing she wanted people to think about when looking at Ai Weiwei's work. Now, to me, this 1-to-1 ratio of having one backpack represent a potential of a singular loss is pretty epic. But it's nothing new in the art world. Can any of you think of pieces you may have actually seen in person yourself that have one thing to represent one individual?
Well, I haven't seen it in person, but we watched a movie in elementary school, and it was about paper, like 7,000 by 7 million
Yep.
word,
Mhm.
and it has to do with the Holocaust. And then at the Holocaust Museum, they have shoes.
Yep,
And other
absolutely.
items like that.
Again, like that, to me, you can read information about the Holocaust, but you go to the Holocaust Museum in DC or any of the other ones around the globe, and I like the shoes in particular, something that has the residue of the human body still on it, actually invested in the installation. That's extremely moving, and I think it gets a point that across to an audience that supersedes some of the difficulty surrounding political discussions, because there's just this object that's telling the story for you. That's why I think I'm so moved by the backpacks and the life vests, because it's figurative without being directly figurative. I don't need a bronze statue to memorialize the thing. And I realized as I was pulling these images, I was really looking at the art of memorial and the social context surrounding memorial-based work. This is actually a printout of the children that were lost as he was pulling together the information with his team of people. There's actually a really great documentary called Never Sorry if you're interested in Ai Weiwei, and it's free on Netflix right now. Get it while the getting's good. Has anybody heard of Christo or Jean-Claude? A couple people? These are the guys that wrap everything. They wrapped motorcycles, chairs, buildings. To me, one of the most socially exciting and interesting wrap projects they did was proposed in 1971 to wrap the Reichstag. This was pretty unprecedented. At this time, you have to remember Germany was still East and West Germany. This is a really different time. And can you imagine just the amount of permits that would need to be procured to get something like this done on a big scale? Like, this to me is extremely exciting, but we're also looking at a situation, my own politics might be revealed here, but we're looking at a situation because the Reichstag had remained vacant, I think, till just a few years before they actually installed this. I think from 1933 to about 1990 or 92, it was empty because it burned down in 1933. Hitler used that building's burning down because it was arson. He used it as this sort of political slant to gain power. He had recently been elected, and he said, oh, you need to watch out. You need to watch out for the other side. Look at what they've done. They've burned down this building. Now that sounds an awful, very familiar to me to things going on today, politically in a big sweeping scope. One tragedy happens, and how is it monopolized or appropriated by another side to kind of convey a story or an angle? So wrapping the Reichstag and just the bureaucracy surrounding doing that is amazing to me. Now the type of fabric they're using here is this kind of weird aluminum mesh. So it's lightweight, But if I remember correctly, they had to like have 100 rock climbers hired to come in and help unfurl the fabric over all the different sides of the architecture. I also think it tells a story to sort of like wrap this architecture, because they had just decided to move the parliament back to Berlin at this time in 1992. So the architects had been hired to work on this building. And in that window of this building's resurrection, kind of wrapped it like a gift, and it would be revealed to the public. Now, I really like to think, and I know that the German people and the German government wanted to kind of have this unveiling very strategically, that they were acknowledging their history, their past, and the difficulties surrounding even this architectural structure, but also looking forward to something new. So a lot of the work that I'm evaluating is looking directly at suppression and oppression, social wrongdoings, and kind of looking at history, where we are and where we are now as an artist. And these are really big goals I have personally as a maker, and I don't have the people, staff, or help that these individuals have. But these are the folks that sort of inspire me to do something more than just for my own personal welfare or wealth in the studio. It took 24 years for them to negotiate this building, 6 different presidents, and it only stayed up for 2 weeks. They only wanted it to stay up for 2 weeks. People wanted it to stay longer. But I also think there's something beautiful in this fleetingness, that it's up and then it's going to be gone. I think in the time, like 5 million people saw it. It's huge. 2 weeks. I also love this dated image. It's the 90s. When I ask if people have seen, again, that kind of 1-to-1 ratio, I can't help but think of Maya Lin. How many have seen the Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C.? Does anybody know, or have you heard anything about the history of it? Was it well received when she first proposed it? What do you remember?
It was not, yeah.
Can you recall as to why?
It was insulting. They didn't think it was impressive enough, majestic enough, that there weren't like people standing up. And
Yeah.
it was too acute.
At risk of being completely inappropriate, we call it the sort of like a dead guy statue. It's the big socially prominent piece in, you know, a downtown area of somebody in bronze, typically a warrior. Sometimes they're on horseback if you're lucky, if they had extra money for bronze, they're on horse. They ran out of money, they're just standing there. But so this was very much a big deviation. Does anybody have any other guesses on why it was so?
Well, they're not in alphabetical order. It's hard to
Yeah.
find.
A couple of things. The fact that it was in alphabetical order, people sort of raged over because they were concerned that if you were going to look for one of your loved ones in the sea of 50,000 other names, 57,000 other names plus, that there'd be a problem. Well, if you had lost your great uncle John Smith in the war, would you really want to be looking for John Smith in a sea of other John Smiths? Mm-hmm. How would you know what engraved John Smith was yours? Her piece, her proposal was pretty revolutionary. She was actually an undergraduate student in architecture at Yale at the time when she pitched this project. And there's a documentary, I think it's called A Strong, Clear Vision of its making. If you're interested in that, I really recommend. So when she recommended it be chronological, they came up with this platform where there's a book located and you can find out exactly what area, what panel your family member's name was on, or your loved one. Also, it was one of the few pieces early on that really considered trying to make a piece fully veteran accessible. How do you get somebody in a wheelchair that's maybe lost a limb in war into a site and out of a site in its creation? Also, and it goes untalked about a lot, but Maya Lin, she was a Chinese American. She was Asian. It did not bode well to the veterans that they had an Asian do the sculpture. She was called every name in the book. Not to excuse people's behavior at that time, but we're also looking at one of the most contested wars in history. Soldiers that arrived back home getting beat up, spit on, yelled at, instead of being revered for the risk that they just took for their country, regardless of what we think of the government that sent them into war, and trying to be able to separate those two things from our belief system. Weirdly, it's been one of the most popular monuments since, because when people actually get to be in front of it, and you get the feeling of going down into the earth, below grade in the mall, to actually see yourself in this polished black stone reflected back at you, you have to confront your own image and your own relationship with those names there. And now it's held up as the standard to follow for public monuments. At the time, it was one of the most difficult to get passed through. It was hugely contested, and they had to go back to the drawing table over and over again. If we can't face death, we'll never overcome it. You have to look it straight in the eye. Then you can turn around and walk back out into the light. This is a comment she made, not just about this monument, but I think about that reflection that you see when you go face yourself. This was her proposal, this little pastel drawing. She had written a couple paragraphs to go with it. And initially when they were looking to review the submissions, because I think there was like 14 or 1,500 submissions, narrowed it down. They didn't know who proposed which ones. They didn't know she was Asian. They didn't know she was still a student. And they weirdly sent a delegation to go let her know. And of course, her and her friends are freaking out at Yale because she just found out she's gotten one of the biggest architecture jobs available. So briefly back to my work, I'll just show a couple of things and I'm going to call it a day. Working at a bigger scale is really difficult for me. I'm navigating my own personal limitations while still wanting to make work that has more to do than just with my own physicality and what I can accomplish in the studio. I'm married to a vet. I tried to get in the Marines myself, but they left when they saw my body and sent me over to the Air Force counter, which if you've been in the military, you'd laugh at that. I'm also examining things like a two-party system, a dominant Republican and Democratic side, as far as those being the only two choices available to many of us for most of our lives. So doing stuffed works like a two-headed snake, a polycephalic patriot. Looking at the American fairy tale and an empire that sometimes some people feel is falling or faltering at the very least. In this case, I'm using American flags to create a Rapunzel image. This piece is probably about 20 feet when it's all unfurled. Mobile gravestones, death is on the move. What's interesting is I do get some pushback on my work and research, but never from veterans, never from people that have actually served, but usually people that purport to support those that have served. But if you've ever been in war and have lost somebody, it's a difficult thing. By making the monument mobile instead of stationary and heavy, it changes things. I've been daydreaming potentially at one of my next projects to actually take these monuments out into the street. I'd like to maybe have people video or photograph me or other people pushing these things up and down hills in different towns and areas to sort of see if maybe a different relationship can be acquired with these works going into public. These are a couple documentaries that I think might be of interest if you liked any of the artists I talked about, Maya Lin, Ai Weiwei, Christo, and Jean-Claude. The first two are documentaries. The third is a talk that Christo gave. Jean-Claude has since passed. That was his wife. In the beginning of their career, Christo, because he was the male, was the only one that got any attention. Then finally, we kind of came around to acknowledging Jean-Claude's importance in their research together. But then she passed, and now Christo's the one sort of touring and talking about the work. And thank you for hearing me out today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for any of the panelists? I do. It's not so much a question, it's a comment about something that you mentioned. Your mentor was concerned that your art might be focused on the process rather than the product. I think as mental health professionals, as psychologists or art therapists, I think we do sort of focus on the process. The process is more important than the product. It's not really a question there, but it's just an interesting observation there. Because then there's also this idea that if you're creating art in a therapeutic context, it's still art. I'm not sure what anybody's thoughts are about that.
Well, for me, it was kind of a hard one to battle, but I think it comes from stigmas that both areas face. The professor that warned me, he ended up confessing to me he was severely bipolar and going through his own issues. So he was kind of imposing his own fear and baggage onto me. That's why I said he could have perhaps delivered it with a caveat that it doesn't mean that what you do can't have therapeutic or cathartic qualities, but as somebody that is showing my artwork at galleries and museums internationally, I talk very openly about the things that motivate the work, but there you can potentially upstage it. And I think that's why so many artists, unfortunately, are a little too quiet about their practice and what might motivate their, their creative prowess, their desire to actually make, because there is a stigma associated with it, and there's still very much a stigma, particularly with mental illness.
I was just thinking too, when I was in graduate school, I had the same experience with a professor. I did a whole series that was based on a box of old schoolwork of mine. And I also really got into using dried like leaves and flowers and stuff like that. And I'll never forget this professor coming up to me and just being, this stuff looks so sentimental. Or aren't you afraid someone's going to think this is sentimental? And I just, I'm still a raging feminist, and I was a raging feminist at the time, and I just wanted to say, stereotypes, shut up. You look like deeper than that, maybe for like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And he was so clearly, I went to a school that was full, I'm sorry if I'm insulting anybody here, but I went to a school that was full of dead white guys. They all got their degrees in the 1960s, and they had a certain mindset about art, and really it rocked their world to have people like me in their classes. I was older too, so I would talk right back at them for the most part. But I remember lots of arguments about the purpose of art, and I knew I was doing art for myself at the time, but I was also looking at a career in higher education, so I knew that I had to exhibit that work eventually, so it had to have, but frankly, I never cared. I never cared. I've hardly ever sold any of my artwork, and I just don't care. It's beautiful.
Yeah, political artwork doesn't sell very well.
Right. Yeah, so
traditionally
you
pretty,
understand that,
pretty
yeah,
things.
yeah. And and getting shows, getting people to understand, why you do the work that you do, and that it's worthwhile, to exhibit it. All of that, all those arguments about the purpose of art, is pretty interesting. And you couldn't say things like, well, I did it because it's about my mother. They don't want to hear that. And I don't know if that's changed much, but it had a huge impact on me too when I was a student. Mostly it just got me mad. And I kept doing what I was doing. I don't care.
See, I don't mind somebody saying that they maybe don't want to hear it, or that they're having difficulty entering the work because of it. But I did want people to enter into my work. I did want to be speaking for more than just myself in this case. So trying to create space for others, because I think that's what people are really thrown by. If they don't see space for themselves, and you're sharing your artwork out there in the world. So for me, it became an issue of accessibility. I want to invite people in, because the whole thing about artists being defensive, we are, and we're territorial, and we don't share our inner thoughts and sort of the security of our making the ways that maybe we should. And that's probably why our bank accounts are shy. People can be intimidated as all hell about getting invested in the creative process. Or I'm watching people's behavior, taking my students to a museum for the first time. Everybody gets really quiet, like they're in a library, hands in their pockets, and I get it, but at the same point, I'm walking around like I own the joint, getting yelled at by the guards because I'm pointing at things too closely.
I can't stand those. When you go into museums anymore, especially, there's a sign up against every single artwork telling you exactly what you're supposed to know and think about it, and that just I can't stand that. And when I was a teacher too, of course, I would take my students to museums and galleries as well, and they would look at me like I'm supposed to sit there and explain all that artwork, and I would refuse to do it. And it was one of those things that I got accused of when they thought I wasn't a good teacher, because I wouldn't stand in front of artworks and expound about what they were supposed to think. I mean, the whole point of art is that, when the viewer sees it, the viewer is going to bring their own experience to it. That's what it's supposed to be.
Although, I didn't title my work. I thought, I'm doing pretty self-explanatory stuff here, The title seemed a little redundant, But what I realized is that not everyone is a visual learner. And sometimes if I can say grandmother's garden, or moonlight walk, or mist over the mountain, it gives someone an entryway. And then hopefully they will, you know, decide they want it or not. But tying words, because I'm not a real verbal person, but tying words to my visual work, it allows me to create a little poetry sometimes. And I like to do haiku sometimes when I'm, you know, working on something. But it's like it gives that entryway or that permission. Because in a museum or in the gallery at the bank, people don't go to the Community Trust Bank into the gallery because it's somebody else's bank. We don't go into somebody else's bank. It's not our bank, you know? And so how do you break down some of those barriers? Because we do, you know, if you don't say, I mean, I remember when I was probably about 18 or 19, and Alan's in graduate school, and, you know, and what am I? And I was always painting, and because I wanted to be an artist, you know. It was like I wanted to be an artist. Well, then there was a point that I had to say, well, I'm an artist, and that it's the start of that journey for me. But it's like that, you know. I didn't grow up in a family of artists. I grew up in small business, and my mother and father were the first ones to go to college, and so I don't know where I came. I mean, it's by second grade I knew I was going to be an artist. My father was an architect, so I saw his work up all the time. I just thought you had your drawing table in the middle of the floor, and you had your stuff everywhere all the time, and that's what I do. But just being around different art shows and working with grade school students, there is a disconnect. You know, we're disconnected from our emotions. We're disconnected from from nature, and we're disconnecting math from art, and we're disconnecting English from art. We're disconnecting all of these things, and art's over here somewhere that nobody needs or understands. And I think if you're going to be a good scientist, you should be an artist of some kind. Or how are you even going to know how to interpret your world? How are you going to know how to communicate to anybody? It is so necessary just to have an awareness of, I hear this beautiful sound, where's it coming from? Or someone took these sounds that are there for everybody else and they put it together this way. Wow, there's how many strings on a guitar? I can't even tell you, because I'm not a musician. But you take the same strings and all of a sudden you have millions of songs. I'm sorry.
I think it.
Question.
It's interesting you said that if you're going to be a good scientist, you should be a good artist. Because since I was in grade school, we take these aptitude tests, and I would always score 50% art, 50% science. So I was always troubled, and so my brothers were the artists, was a landscape architect, was an architect, was a cartoonist, and so the men were the artists, and I had to send the functional. So I was never encouraged to be an artist, and so I secretly would take art classes when I started college, and so I attribute my life drawing classes because they train you to train your eye, not look at the paper, but train your eye to view the organic object and maneuver, make that direct connection with what your visual sees and rendering it directly with your hand. And so I attribute those life drawing and life painting classes with making me a great geoarchaeologist, because I can look at a rock and say, it's not just regular granite, it has little hues of purplish pink, and so I know that there's artists in it, and so I went through some sort of process and came from, you get enough information, you know what geographic area it came from. I'm from Southern California, and so anyway, so that's a really good point you bring up. But coming here, I left as a director of an archaeology company with my husband, and I left that behind, and I was able to become an artist now. It's so just that point you bring up is really good, because it trains your eye to actually empirically see what's actually there, you know, and so I think that translates well for art. My point is, for a question for you, because you talked about working with institutions. So last year I submitted some artwork to the Prohibition Festival in Lexington. So kind of got tired of trying to fit into, from Southern California, I got tired of trying to fit into the Bible Belt. So I tried to look and talk and speak how we do, whatever. So I did a whole rock and roll series with a lot of Jimi Hendrix and Rolling Stones and some punk rock stuff. And so they accepted 3 of my artworks, and then they offered me a show to curate the show. And so I'm curating a show in September, October for the Lexington Art Week. And I talked about, so I think bluegrass transplants, this is great. I meet a lot of artists that come to the bluegrass and they're really embraced, and their art is very accepted and promoted. And so they're like, yeah, this is rad, we love it. And so I called it bluegrass transplant culture. So I'm really into hobo code ever since I was a little kid. They taught us that in grade school. So I called it bluegrass transplant culture, tramps, hobos, and nomads. And I kind of did this little thing on Facebook, a little video kind of explaining my concept of my show. And then 2 weeks later, they did a public release, but they really wanted me to take out that wording. And I'm from Southern California, Los Angeles, so I come from a punk rock background, really reverent. It's like I'm an artist now, I'm doing a show, but then now you want me to cleanse it. And he said that some people might be offended by that language.
What were they offended by? The word train?
How do you keep your authenticity while trying to work with institutions? And where do you compromise? Because I haven't even posted their release because I'm having trouble a little bit by it. And
I think any of us up here could comment about acts of compromise. I've been really lucky, at risk of sounding cheesy. I've been really lucky because I don't feel like I've had to compromise. Definitely not my mouth. Anybody that knows me well, I've got 2 of my students here, unfortunately. I talk like a sailor. I write like a sailor. I curate like a sailor, and I make art like a sailor, to be totally honest. So I don't feel like I'm compromising my agenda. I think where I've gotten respect is because I listen really hard to the organizations that I'm working with and will ask them why. But if you're newer to curating, they might be wanting to be more heavy-handed with you to try and help groom you. Weirdly enough, Logan Dennison, the exhibitions director, is giving a talk tomorrow on this very campus. And he'll be talking about LEL's mission because they had a mission. How many have been to the Lexington Art League before? We should plug them. Yeah. They've had a mission that's evolved over the past couple of years. They used to be very much about supporting, we kind of call them sometimes the Sunday painters, not just the professional artists, but also really embracing and trying to support the hobbyists locally, going back to kind of the access of art stuff. But then their mission evolved in a much more contemporary, maybe edgier, more difficult work, and I was happy to be part of that wave, but I think it alienated some of their audience. So they might be overcorrecting, and I'm totally speaking out of turn because I don't know what their rationale was to edit or censor your titling or your descriptive language. You can always walk away and not do it. I hate to say that. I've had to walk away from a couple opportunities before, but not very often. You get used to navigating it when you've done it longer, but curation is kind of its own beast. Certain places might require certain limitations in exhibitions, like even Gallery on Main, we weren't able to show nudes there because there was bank clients coming through, and that space was gifted for $1 a month rent. It was basically a gift of the bank, so they had limitations. There could be something that you and I are unaware of with LAL's new mission or financing, and it's a shame because it can be pretty puritanical. We're really worried about what one word is going to do to a bigger audience, it's going to ruin you. And to me, that's kind of unfortunate. But I have an edgy mouth hole, so.
I think that's a really wonderful point because see, I think I embrace any art. I do. I just and it's different art speaks to different people, but it's such a powerful voice, and to be able to be exposed to different art and the reason it's creative is just always so it just grabs me. And whether I want to create that art or not doesn't mean it doesn't invalidate what someone is doing. And can I do a really quick story about art and science? I'll make it really short. My first art teacher, I bonded with her in high school, and her husband taught at Moorhead, and this was '69. And so for all these years, we kept in touch, and they would come to all of my shows, and I just adored them. And we spent a lot of time together. About a few years before he died, I was working on a project and trying to pull some, I was working with a science project, and so it's how do we talk about this to students, and how are we, I'm working with the scientists, we have the art, how are we working together? And so he told me his story. He was the biology chemistry professor at Moorhead, and he taught during the 50s and 60s and early 70s. Well, he always, his science students had to keep a journal. And he said they didn't have to be an artist, but they had to sketch what they observed. And he said some of the manuscripts were incredibly beautiful. But the idea was that they had to document what they saw and take notes and describe what they saw using words and images. And then in the 60s, the textbooks started changing, and wonderful photographs were starting to be incorporated into the science books. And so keeping the journal was a different activity. It wasn't as detailed because they had all of this reference material. After a couple of years, he's like trying to figure out why his students are not passing his test. He didn't change the test. I mean, he was still teaching the same material. And so he brought back the journal. Even if they had the photograph of whatever it was, they would have to draw the photograph. And he said they started making better grades again. You know, it was like it brought the grades right back up. And he said there's a real connection with observation and memory. And it helped their language because they were describing things more, and it helped their visibility. Was that art? No, it's not high art, but it's a tool. And I just think that that's valuable. It's a valuable component. It's a relationship that works.
There are medical schools who have their medical students draw. It's draw it to know it or something is this idea. So they're drawing body parts or whatever it is they're studying for that very reason.
It's gained a lot of momentum in the past 5 years or so, too. Not just medical school, but business school. I think, and you could probably attest to this from your own experiences, being forced to stop and draw something to slow you down, like heaven forbid we slow down at all. It's like absolutely precious to put down your phone and slow down. And I can't, if I'm not doing something like trying to make art, I have a really difficult time even putting down my phone because I'm a little bit of an addict. But the force, like even think about geology, to force yourself to observe, you know, the strata and a set of layer of stones, you will have more to write about. You will be thinking about it differently. And it's been something that's overlooked for so long. I had a student who wanted to be a plastic surgeon, and his parents called me yelling. This was at a previous institution. It was a small liberal arts college in Tennessee. The parents called me yelling like, he shouldn't be taking art classes. Why are you encouraging him to take art classes? He's going to be a plastic surgeon. And I told his dad, I'm like, I don't know about you, but somebody's going to be cutting on me, giving me a new thigh, a new nose, a new shoulder. I'd like them to have some figure drawing capabilities. Just gonna throw that out there. Yeah, he got real quiet, but you know, I do writing for that matter, like something that slows you down and lets you be creative or gives you eye-hand coordination or that moment of pause. A lot of us don't do it unless we're asked or we have an output, and I think this is a place where more making is very valuable.
I don't know, I just suddenly thought about the program that I had at the homeless shelter. Two things. One has to do with censorship. There was an arts council that said I could have a show of the homeless folks' work. And then one of the pieces had green leafy things on it. And I know that the artist deliberately, that was supposed to be marijuana. It was Owen's piece, as a matter of fact, the loved one I lost to suicide. But anyway, I was sharing the space because it was Mental Health Awareness Month with an organization that had a program for folks with mental health issues, and some of them were addiction issues. And so the rationale was I had to take down the leafy painting because there were going to be other people participating in the exhibit who had addiction problems. And I was pretty ticked off. I am not a fan at all of censorship of any kind. But I also know that, you know, you have to walk this fine line between what do you want? You know, what is the end thing? Is the end thing that's important to you just getting that work up? Or is it the title, you know, of the exhibit? And for me, it was more important that I made people aware that homeless people are incredibly talented. And if I had to take one artwork down, and he had other ones in the show, then I went ahead and did that. But I certainly put a whole bunch of stuff on my blog about how it sucked and it wasn't there and all this other stuff. So yeah, there's something else I was going to say. I can't think of what it was. But anyway, and it had to do with the show and what we were just talking about. I don't know, can't remember now. Anyway, I wanted to say that.
And then James Baldwin's documentary movie about him that came out, I guess, about 4 or 5 years ago called Ain't Your Nigger. And there he quotes that, it's quote from him that says that the job of the artist is to make the viewer feel uncomfortable. I think that as artists, that sometimes we kind of say things either through visually or through oral, basically through writing, that makes people, I guess, look at reality of things and not always basically what people present themselves to be, but the true inherent nature of either our society or ourselves. And sometimes we get so, I guess, used to trying to put this facade on, and people don't want to feel comfortable seeing the real, I guess, aspects of people or things. And me personally, I have a background, a degree in engineering. Oftentimes people kind of, I guess, start questioning me, but how I can be an engineer, I was do photography too, right? Also, I'm like, that's how I used to be. Thinking about some of the great artists for a time, they also mathematicians too. Mm-hmm. They were, you know, writers. They were this, that, or there. One of the first Renaissance people was a physician from Kemet, aka Egypt. I can't think of his name right now. Imhotep, I think was his name. He was a physician, a surgeon, a mathematician, a spiritual leader, among other things also. But I think part of it came about through Newton, Isaac Newton, in the sense that everything was kind of put into a box. So either you're going to be, you know, an artist, or you're going to be an engineer, you're going to be a scientist, you're going to be a geologist. That's all you can be, nothing else. Instead of realizing that, you know, something that came out through Niels Bohr, Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, and so on and so forth, that everything's connected, quantum thinking. And so sometimes, though, in college in particular, you say the same thing. You go to College of Arts, it's specifically just fine arts, though. Next step, there may be mathematics stuff, but they're tied to each other. Across maybe the way should be engineering, or it could be, you know, history or literature, what it may be. So realizing that everything's connected to each other, we need to become a full person. To become a full person means you need both your left and your right brain. And for me, my daughter in particular, when she was born in 1998, I tried to still become observative, to be patient. I said, hey, hold your horses. Patience is a virtue. I want you to observe what we're doing right now. That way you can basically outsmart me and become better than I am today when I was your age. I realized that at the early age that basically, in my opinion, people are kind of some of the smartest people I know, people who are most observative too. But you mentioned in the back though, that basically you take time to observe something though, you see so much more. Other people kind of look at something and move on. When I go to art show, or art gallery, or museum, I might sit in front of a piece for like 5 minutes or so, just looking at, observing though what's in there. And I'll be like, why are you sitting so long? Because like I'm gonna take it all in. I'm gonna kind of observe and take in what the artist though was trying to signify through the piece. To me, I respect the person too. Same thing watching a movie. I said the end of the credits. We kind of pay respect to people that kind of help to make the movie that I'm watching now. I think that kind of seeing things in that way, you become less judgmental for one, and two, you realize that we're all the same at the end of the day. And I think you are having more empathy and love for other people as well. And for me personally, I'm not telling too often about things. That's kind of caused problems with my family, other people too that I know, because I think things as they are, and I try not to, I guess, to censor myself though about anything I do. And for me personally, I mean, if I have artwork though that especially people, that could sometimes be a good thing. It could lead to a conversation that may not have happened previously. 1999, I was on Yahoo chat room years ago when still chat rooms around, and then it's a black kind of I guess themed group or whatever. A guy came in there, claimed to be a neo-Nazi and stuff like that. And people like, oh no, get out here and stuff, blah blah. It's not bad. Talk to him like he's a regular person though. So okay, and no one more about you. He was a white guy who was basically dropped out of high school, was a busboy in New York, was pissed off at me because basically people who were black and Mexican had more money than he did. But top off though, instead came to neo-Nazi though. I knew more about Hitler than he did. I'm like, how you call yourself neo-Nazi? I know nothing about Hitler though and stuff, and we're not Nazi organization and stuff like that though. So I kind of realized that then though, this was more or less done stuff, not necessarily that he was, that basically he was kind of displacing his anger though, basically. This was not that people who were got hired above him and stuff, they deserved more money because for one, they had degrees. They did so they had more skills than he did. And it's kind of, I guess, and so I guess my point is that sometimes we kind of take people or things at face value, don't look beneath the surface. And that's something kind of we try to do more often though, where it's looking at art though, or even stuff you write, stuff you listen to. Go deeper and basically kind of see what really entails.
I think we're close to running out of time. I want to thank all of the panelists for being here today, for sharing your work. Thanks to all of you for being here. Again, if you have questions about the art therapy concentration, my email address is up there and it's on that paper that I handed out. Dr. Ward, did you want to add anything?
I'm really curious to know if there are any ideas that have come out of today, because, I mean, we're always interested in collaborations and developing new things. I know Savannah Campbell has an idea for a workshop she would like to do within the Department of Psychology.
Yeah.
And we're really interested in this kind of thing. So, Savannah, if you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, what I was looking at would be about a maybe half-day workshop on different expressive therapy techniques, about like writing, visual art, musical art, just how that can be incorporated into mental health practices, the validity of them, what they involve, how they're done, just as an option.
So there are people that are interested in this. Perhaps email Savannah, and I think you can, savannah.campbell@EKU.edu. Yeah. So, and I'm Melinda Moore. I'm the project director of the EKU Safe Grant, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Judy Vongden, who's the grant coordinator. And we're always very interested in collaborations between sort of psychology and suicide prevention and art or whatever. We're really interested at sort of changing the culture so that we can talk about things we don't normally talk about and inspire people and get people doing things a little bit differently. So if you have any ideas, I'm all ears usually when it comes to ideas and collaborations.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here.
If you needed a certificate of attendance, there are an alphabetical order on the table.
Excuse me, I'm from 5.
I don't see one of your names. There's a little blank.
Oh my gosh.
I know, I was thinking more of this one, but not placing me.
I know. Well, how many years has that been? Yeah. I had brown hair.